Greetings and salutations, once again, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, aliens, earthlings, and every species in between. This is Robert Phoenix, broadcasting to you live from South Central Texas, the capital city, the music city of America, rivaling only Nashville as the place to go to let your hair down and get your freak on. That's right, because we keep it weird here in Austin. Although I'm not sure how much longer they can keep it weird, because it's getting harder and harder to live here monetarily. I guess you can be rich and eccentric and weird, but do you want to live here? Yeah, I think so. It's a pretty cool place. I'm still looking for friends here. I don't have anybody to go out and play with. I ride my bike up and down the parking lot of my apartments, looking for other people hanging out, wanting to ride their bike, play a little catch. But there's nobody out. They're all inside. They're all on their computers and cell phones. So what's happening out there? Crazy day in the neighborhood yesterday. Trump got down and got with it, dropping some nationalistic bombery. He may not bomb North Korea, but I swear to God, he likes to strafe the other side every now and then when he is unleashed and uncollared, which apparently he was at the UN. It was a very interesting speech, and if you're anti-communist, that's, you're raising your coffee mug to Donald Trump in the morning saying, wow, that was really bold. Well, you know who wrote that speech? That speech was written by Stephen Miller. Stephen Miller I don't think he is, maybe he is now still because he's in the White House. He is a Jeff Sessions, aide de camp. He's Jeff Sessions' right-hand man. And Stephen Miller is, he's got an edge. He is an edgy fellow, that Stephen Miller. You can go all the way back to high school in Huntington Beach, California, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, where Stephen Miller went to school. And clearly stated his extreme right-wing bona fides at an early age. And there's plenty of stuff on the internet out there if you want to find it. I recommend the clip on Stephen Miller that Vice magazine is running. People who are into MAGA and Make America Great Again, they champion Stephen Miller as one of the few people left inside the Trump administration that will fly the flag for those values. And Stephen Miller did not disappoint yesterday, let me tell you. I mean, look, if you're looking for spectacle, that UN speech, that thing is right up there. It's right up there. I mean, Trump is taking a howitzer to communism. But you know what's really interesting about the whole thing, right? So he's taking a howitzer to communism, the Gatling gun, right? But he's also saying we're going to have to, take on Iran and North Korea and Syria. And that's the old sort of tape loop, right? That's the tape loop we're getting because, Stephen Miller is connected to the old Likudniks over there in the Holy Land, and they like their war. They're into their war. I was watching Steve Bannon, who's very bright, and I have a lot of respect for Steve Bannon because he has an understanding of history, though I don't always agree with his version of history. I don't always agree with it. Steve Bannon is not a conspiracy theorist. He does not look for alternative threads of history like some of us, but he is clear and he understands global dynamics, politics, and more importantly, he gets populism. He gets nationalism. He gets the fact that we're all basically being sold out as units for the globalist system, which is the synthetic application of reality, to be quite honest with you. He gets that. Bannon comes from a working class family. He was a working class naval, he wasn't a naval officer. I think Bannon rose to lieutenant in the Navy, which isn't bad, right? Lieutenant, it's right below a captain. I don't think they have captains in the Navy, do they? Maybe they do. Like, of course, they captain a ship. What am I talking about? Anyway, if you listen to the interview with Steve Bannon with Charlie Rose, he's incredibly articulate, well-spoken. He gets it. He totally gets it. The problem with Bannon is that he's a frothing Zionist. And he is one of these. He really wanted to go to war with Iran. I have this from people that have people that know people on the inside, and he really wanted to go to war with Iran, and the generals opposed it. So here we have this is the breakdown now, and we're going to get back to Stephen Miller because there's some very interesting parallels with Trump, Stephen Miller, and Roy Cohn, which I'm going to talk about. So inside the White House, you have a group that is more globalist in nature, and they tend to view Israel as an aggressive nation state. Now, this is really an interesting kind of dichotomy because Israel is kind of running its own program. It is basically funded by the United States through an extreme amount of money we send to them every single year. They bring that money back into the United States, a lot of it through AIPAC, which is the lobby group who then influence lawmakers on Capitol Hill. So there's this circular exchange of money, favor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there are people out there who will tell you that it is basically a crime syndicate state as well. And I'm not, I'm sharing with you what I've heard. Okay, I'm just sharing with you what I've heard. They have their fingers in pretty much all the information gathering. They are the backbone and the spine for the NSA. They're private companies, of which I believe are what Variant. Was it the Analysis? Anyway, those are just two. There are more. They're basically running all the information gathering for the NSA. And when they do that, there's a little bit of a side door that siphons, a lot of the tranched calls and all the massive amounts of data off. So they're a very unique country. Let's put it that way. But it feels to me like on the globalist side, they're not as supportive of the nation state of Israel. They're just not. And on the nationalist side, there is deep ties and deep support because if you listen to Steve Bannon, Israel demonstrates what nationalism is. Through Zionism, Israel became deeply nationalistic, up to the point where it's almost, chilling at times. The relationship with Palestine, Gaza, and all the checkpoints. I mean, it's clearly, it might even not only would rival Soweto 1970, it might even be worse, to be honest with you. So there's a lot of criticism coming from one side against Israel, and there's an incredible amount of support. So nationalism in this country, it's a very sophisticated program if you think about it, right? Let me take a sip of my coffee and I'll try and break it down. It's almost as if you cannot be nationalistic without loving, supporting, and being tied nationalistically to Israel, because ideologically it is the same kind of nuts and bolts that nationalism is tied down to, bolted into. If you're a globalist, then it's much easier to let go of the whole idea of the nation state and the fierce kind of entrenchment that the nation state has to take on in the face of globalism, in which case the nation state of Israel becomes a lot less interesting, and what's more important is global hegemony. So to that extent, there's less support on the left. So it's a very interesting dynamic. It's like if you believe in America and you want to see, us getting out of all these foreign wars, you want to see us getting all these, transnational shenanigans and the NGOs and all the BS that we pull over in Africa. You want to see us get out of that stuff and really focus and concentrate our energies on this country. You want to see that, then you're moving towards the nationalist model. And if you move towards the nationalist model, then you're embracing other tenets and associations that go along with nationalism. This is how the game has been wired. So there's this very strange kind of cognitive dissonance where you can't be a nationalist without accepting certain countries and certain ways of doing business and the deep ties. Because if you do not accept that, then you're trafficking in cognitive dissonance. Well, how can you be for all those things? And, you're not for this country and you're not for this model of governance and this model of the nation state. It's a weird kind of catch-22 that they get people into, because then what happens is that they buy into this idea of nationalism, then they're buying into the whole thing. It's a lot like cable. When you get the entire package for cable, you want as many channels as you can, although people are, of course, cable cutting. You want as many channels as you can, and you want the greatest amount of bandwidth for your download service, right? Or your upload service, your computer, and that's how it goes. And if you start taking things away, when you're left with less, theoretically. And can you live with less? Of course you can. That's not really what the issue is here. So I think Bannon is really smart, but then he gets into this kind of frothing sort of relationship with Zionism, which I think is, not in the best interest of a lot of people or anybody. I'm sorry. I'm just being open and upfront about it. So can we have this idea of nationalism without tying ourselves to other countries who theoretically might support that model of nationalism? That's the question of the day. I've been talking about this for years, and not from a nationalistic perspective. I've been talking about it from a psychological, process-oriented perspective. If you are somebody and you're struggling in life, and you've got all these commitments and all these distractions, and you're bleeding money, and you're running around trying to borrow from Peter to pay Paul, meanwhile, your family has run amok, and you've got issues with just about every single member of your family, and you can't seem to manage your family, you can't seem to manage your budget, but you just keep borrowing, and you keep extending outwards to the point where there's absolutely no center, no center. We'll get back to the center thing too. And you're on the verge of a breaking point. It's called a crisis. It's called a crisis. It's an entity, an individual in crisis. What is usually the best thing to do when something like that happens? Yeah, you retreat. You pull in things. You stop your prolific spending. You take time to be with the members of your family, to understand, what's going on, why they're upset. And through that process, you gather strength. You gather strength, and you fortify your position from within on a deeply psychic level. This is what people do. Sometimes they have to go to recovery to do it. They have to stop everything because they're at a point of complete, utter collapse and breakdown, which leads to breakthrough. To me, this was always a model that was very applicable to this situation with this country. And whether you want to wrap it in a flag and go marching down the street with it, well, that's your business. I'm looking at the health of the organism and pulling back so that we can refortify, retrench, reassess, realign who we are, what we are, and where we're going. That is not a globalist move. That is bringing things back inside. And nobody ever talks about this. The only thing that's ever talked about is expansion, 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 more, expansion, 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 more, because that is the model that we've been taught is the most successful. If you're not expanding, you're not growing. Got to expand, whatever that expansion is, even if the expansion is unhealthy. Doesn't matter. Let's go expand over here. Let's go expand to Yemen. Okay, let's expand to Yemen. It's not healthy. Let's expand our arms sales to Saudi Arabia. See, that's another... When Trump made that deal, he was in that model of expansion. More is good. More is better. So we get tied into knots when it comes to our allegiances and our alliances. So the speech that Trump gave to the UN, written by Stephen Miller, quite interesting. I like the fact that he was shutting down communism. Oh, that was great. It's like, yeah, man, go. You go do that. Make people uncomfortable. That's the Sun-Uranus conjunction, by the way. Making people uncomfortable. Well, Paul Manafort's about to get real uncomfortable. And hold on, before I get to Paul Manafort, I got to just finish this thing off with Stephen Miller. If you look into Trump's past, one of the key players in Trump's past is a guy by the name of Roy Cohn. If you're not familiar with Roy Cohn, let me just say one more. Joseph McCarthy, or 2 words. Joseph McCarthy. Roy Cohn was the aide de camp. He was a young, intense lawyer who was working with Joseph McCarthy on the Committee for Un-American Activities, which resulted in the McCarthy trial. So Roy Cohn was the legal beagle behind Joe McCarthy. Now, there are some people who think that he was placed there specifically by either somebody like Bernard Baruch or Jacob Schiff or one of their de facto agents. So Roy Cohn also became a chief counsel for Fred Trump, and then later Donald Trump. So Roy Cohn and Donald Trump had a very close relationship. Roy Cohn died of AIDS, and he was a character in the play Angels in America. The Tony Kushner play. Roy Cohn plays a major role in that play. So this is the guy that Trump was very, very comfortable with growing up as his father's chief counsel and a counsel for Trump as well. If you look at Stephen Miller and his role, he's very Roy Cohn-esque in some ways. So this is somebody that, from a memory standpoint, Donald Trump would be quite familiar with and comfortable with. Because Miller is now playing the Roy Cohn role. It's a very interesting juxtaposition and kind of alignment. So when he wrote that speech about anti-communism, that's coming right out of the McCarthy era, and to some degree and extent, Roy Cohn's influence over Joseph McCarthy. McCarthy, the whole thing with the Committee for Un-American Activities was kind of a ruse. And here's what was happening. What they did is they set up Joe McCarthy, and they had him become a figurehead for this witch hunt. And they took a few scalps because the Communist Party was very, very alive, very active, very participatory at a deeper level inside the infrastructure, the governmental geopolitical infrastructure of this country. And had been since the advent of Bolshevism in 1917, growing membership and working towards the unification of the goals of the Communist Party. And that's what they were doing. And so we had the Committee for Un-American Activities, and Joe McCarthy started banging that drum. And of course, there was that dog and pony show, and people like Paul Robeson and Dalton Trumbo and a number of others got barred from Hollywood. And Robeson, I think, left the country and went to Russia after that. So this was kind of a limited hang, though. Like, they were going to expose the problem briefly. It's like, this is the revelation of the method practiced through McCarthyism. We're going to expose it. We're going to give you an idea that this is happening because you kind of know it's happening. So let's get to it before it actually really happens and explodes. So we'll get into it. We'll open it up. We'll take a few scalps. We'll have a few sacrificial goats. And then we'll shut it down. And we'll also besmirch the character of Joe McCarthy so that nothing ever comes out of this again. Because McCarthy began to take this thing seriously. And he thought, well, maybe I could run for president. Maybe I could really, do a red enema in the United States. And they shut him down. So it gave the appearance that the red threat for the time being had been nipped in the bud. But it really hadn't. It was just show and tell. That's all it was. And then after that, because everything seemed to be so overblown, overwrought, like, oh, look at this. All these people's poor lives were ruined by this ruthless and cold ideological takedown by the United States and Joe McCarthy. These poor people, all they wanted to do was make movies, write scripts. That's all they wanted to do, and their lives were ruined. So what happens after that? Any association with communism is laughed at. It's laughed at. Ha 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 ha. The red thread. Oh yeah, the red thread. And I suppose you believe in the devil too. That doesn't exist either. So this is what's happened over time. And meanwhile, communism as a system has grown and grown and grown and grown. Sleeper cells, sleeper cells, sleeper cells. Candidates who have run as both Republicans and Democrats, or Democrats and Republicans, beneath their party affiliation, are likely communists. But yeah, that's right. And they operate under the cover of the Democratic and the Republican Party, but we don't know that. We don't know that. But it's true. It's true. They're not going to openly come out and say, hey, we're a member of the Communist Party. Vote for me. Of course not. They won't get elected. So here's Trump. He comes out, 6 guns blazing against communism. We haven't heard a speech like that at the UN since, well, I don't know, Joe McCarthy? No, he wasn't there. But what I'm trying to do is make a parallel between Stephen Miller and Roy Cohn and Donald Trump. Because Stephen Miller is now playing the Roy Cohn role in Donald Trump's life and ideologically is in the same camp. But and that's not a bad thing. I'm not a communist fan. I saw what happened in Russia. I saw what happened in all these places. It doesn't work. Sorry, it does not work because it really is nothing more than a guise to basically take over all the resources, take away all incentive, turn people into bots, and have the people at the top, the Politburo, sipping the best vodka, eating the best caviar, and bringing in the best human flesh for other appetites and consumption. That's what it's about. It's just a resource grab, an ideological resource grab to a lot of other people. And that's not necessarily saying I'm like banging the drum on capitalism either. Although of the two, it's probably better than communism. But there's got to be a different solution, which is rewarding people for their hard work, their effort, their innovation, and allowing them to build on that, while at the same time creating the modicum of a safety net. Right? So that if people get caught in the wheels, they have a way to kind of get themselves out of there. And as far as the underprivileged or the more economically stressed in this country, certainly there can be programs that are set up and developed to move into those areas and really get down and get into some infrastructure and get into some training, and get the drugs the hell out of those neighborhoods. That's probably not going to happen, especially not the drug part. Anyway, this is my it's never going to be perfect here on this planet. Let's dispel ourselves of that notion. The whole idea of utopia and a golden new age is really a pipe dream. It's a mirage. It's not supposed to be perfect here. It's not. If it were perfect here, you wouldn't come here. Why would you come here? Just to experience perfection? You won't even come here. Maybe the density of physical manifestation might be interesting. But why would you come here? No, it's not meant to be perfect. Even when this forest fire of dissension and deconstruction and the rise of benign evil, finally, benign and not so benign evil, finally extinguishes itself, and it will. What's left over will not be perfect. And it won't be perfect for a long time. If ever. It's not meant to be. It's not meant to be. But what would be nice is if we tipped the scales a little towards the other side for a while and see what we could do with that and see what we could evolve towards and who we could become. Again, it wouldn't be perfect, but it would be interesting and creative, and it would be more conscious. So here we are, Trump banging that drum. That's such a... Have you seen that? Like Kelly's, his expression, he's got his head in his hands. It's classic. You can't control Trump, by the way. You can't control him. You can hit him in. You can hold him down for a little while, but you cannot control the guy. He is uncontrollable. He proved that. He proved that beyond a shadow of a doubt yesterday by dropping those ideological bombs on the UN. I thought it was great. I love that stuff, by the way. And I don't care if Stephen Miller wrote the speech. I don't care if I think they're misguided on North Korea and Syria and Iran. I think they're misguided. That is the Rothschild, blueprint for flipping those countries and getting them to the IMF. And it's also the geopolitical roadmap for greater Israel in that area of the world. And that's why they're banging that drum. That's why Stephen Miller's writing that speech. That's it. And I'm not into that part. But I am into the part where Trump brings chaos. Now that part I like. That's interesting. Because I love to see these institutions get shaken up. That's what I found to be fascinating about the whole thing. So Paul Manafort now, we're gonna segue into Paul Manafort. Paul Manafort has been under investigation, both overtly and covertly, for about the last year. And Paul Manafort was on the Trump campaign. I believe he was the campaign manager at one point. And then the Trump campaign sniffed that Paul Manafort was trouble. Paul Manafort had baggage. And the baggage that Paul Manafort had was with Russia and the Ukraine and business dealings there. So they cut him loose. He was compromised. They cut him loose, and eventually they wound up bringing in Reince Priebus, and they brought in, of course, Steve Bannon and Kellyanne Conway. That was the big kind of pivot. Actually, they brought in Priebus later. They brought him over, but it was really the Kellyanne Conway, Steve Bannon acquisitions of the White House that really turned the election around. So Paul Manafort was under surveillance for a large part of that time, and he was wiretapped. They got a FISA wiretap on Paul Manafort. So they know everything. They know everything about him. They know where he went. They probably know what kind of vodka he drank. They probably know all of the where all the digits are buried in his business deals. And this is coming out through the Mueller investigation. So where does Paul Manafort live? He lives in Trump Tower. And his suite, his room, where he puts his head on his pillow at night, that place was wiretapped. So do you think that they just stopped at Paul Manafort's place? No, they're going to wiretap the whole damn building. And certainly if Manafort is going to be going up to Donald Trump's suite at the top of Trump Tower, don't you think that will be tapped as well? Of course it will be. So this is a very interesting kind of situation that Mueller and his people and the Obama holdovers and Susan Rice, who essentially asked for those wiretaps, we all know that, they find themselves in. Because now Trump said, well, I was wiretapped, everybody laughed, and guess what? It's going to come out because, yeah, he was. And this is under the aegis of wiretapping Paul Manafort. Now, what's going to happen to Paul Manafort, he's going to get grand juried. And so much pressure is going to be put on this guy that he is in a position where he's going to be put into a vice grip, a human vice grip. And every moment of every day, the vice grip will get tighter and tighter and tighter until he winds up, singing the blues. And if Trump is anywhere near any of his dealings with Russia and the Ukraine, then it'll come out. This is what happens with grand juries. And Manafort can only respond to the questions of the grand jury. That's it. That's it. He cannot present his own defense under a grand jury. The grand jury is almost like a star chamber. Although a star chamber operates in total secrecy, the grand jury is one step above a star chamber. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens here over the next few months as they continue to apply pressure on Donald Trump, both from the inside and the outside, and ultimately to squeeze him like a watermelon seed right out of the White House. But I gotta say, man, that speech was interesting. That was a really interesting speech. Only because it shook things up. It was like a speech quake. Nobody ever says that at the UN. It's kind of great in some ways. But, ideologically, I'm not into the whole, let's take down North Korea and Syria and Iran. It's not my thing for a number of reasons, which I've clearly stated in this show and many others. But here we go. We're off again. And speaking of here we go, another earthquake in Mexico. Apparently 200 people are dead. That's 2 significant earthquakes in Mexico since the eclipse. Now, even though Mexico is not or was not on the eclipse path, it is part of a landmass that is connected to the eclipse. Yeah, that's right. Mexico is in it's not quite South America, is it? People think, oh yeah, Mexico's in South America. Well, it's only because maybe they share a similar language. No, Mexico is in North America. And once you get past Mexico, guess where you are? You're in Central America. They call it the North America Free Trade Agreement for a reason. And Mexico is a part of it. So even though Mexico was not in the eclipse path, it is part of the landmass that experienced the eclipse path. And now we've had 2 devastating earthquakes in Mexico, and people are on their toes in California, preparing for the next big disaster, the next big quake. Keep your eye on it. We've had a number of highly unusual and very intense natural, in quotes, disasters since the eclipse. And we haven't even got to September 23rd yet. So, in ending today, bringing it all back to... before I do this, before before I do my sign off here, I just wanted to get back on the Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson for president piece that I brought up yesterday. There's a committee that has drafted him as a potential candidate. They're out of Virginia, of course. So he has now formally signed his papers. I want to clarify that. But a committee has drafted him as a possible candidate, which he has not denied. And by the way, he's not denied the possibility of running. Okay. More poise, less noise. By the way, if you have time, go look up his latest tattoo. Oh boy. Oh boy, you will be interested to say the least when you see the tattoo and read what he has to say about the tattoo. Okay. So let's bring it back here. Bring it back to the center without any center, which was something that was brought up by Steve Creamy over on the comments section on YouTube, which he eloquently stated that there really is no center, that everything is the center, which is a beautiful summation of life. So let's bring it back to everything. And here we are on this day, September 16th, was it 19th? We're on the 19th, right? 20th, 2:20 or 9:20. Oh my God. I've got 22 in my head. On this day, 9/20, just remember three basic things. Three basic things. Be kind to the people that you love. Be kind to the people that you love. Be conscious of what you eat and put in your body and put in your mind. When you have to put something other than what you would normally put in body and mind, be discerning about what you put into it. It's very important because we live in a universe that's based on consent. And if you do not consent, then guess what? You have the right to not participate. Whatever it is, you don't consent in. And from every moment to every moment, you have the opportunity to make that choice, including listening to this show or not. You don't have to consent or buy into everything I say. Not everybody does, and that's how it should be. So with that, I'll leave you with our maxim. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to open what's possible.